Hey guys, welcome to the Homeschooling Summit 2020. Joining me today is Blair Lee from chomeschoolers.com. Blair, thank you so much for spending the time and coming on the summit.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
And Blair has also agreed to be one of our hosts for the summit this year. So you're going to be seeing a lot more of Blair if you haven't already. Blair, how are you enjoying the interviewing side of things at the moment?
Okay, I was a little worried because I can sometimes be chatty, and I have one interview under my belt, and I've got to be honest, she nailed it. I sat there a couple of times, I had chills. So you guys do not want to miss Michelle Perinella Cason's interview. It was amazing. It's about the changing face of education, and she was a college professor, just sort of accidentally ended up in the homeschool realm, and now she's been teaching online classes for various platforms, and now she's got her own started, and she is, what does she call it, humanities with humanity, and that's how she teaches both all the humanities. It's like, she's pretty cool. It came across in the interview, not because of me at all. Nailed it.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking very much forward to watching that. So let's get to your interview though, and ask you about C Homeschoolers. And yeah, what's behind the name C Homeschoolers?
So C started out as ESA, eclectic secular academic, and so it's the secular academic is a really important term, more important than either is apart, because we're not necessarily a secular group, but we are we're a group that only advocates the use of secular academics, which are those materials recommended by a majority of practicing experts in the field that you're, so if it's math, it's somebody who's an expert in math, or science. And then the eclectic is any darn way that works for you and your family. It can be a whole mix. When I first started educating, there was all this arguing about, are you using classical, or are you an unschooler? And are you truly a classical educator? Or are you truly an unschooler? And I just said, oh my goodness, guys, we are homeschooling to figure out the best way that works with our children. It's going to be different. By its very nature, it's different. And so, and people have, eclectic wasn't a term that was used a lot 16 years ago. I know some people, I've said I never heard it used until the last 6 or 7 years. But some people have heard it longer than that. I've heard from them. When I've made the statement before, but it's just it's a very fluid. I think of it as a very fluid, not really a methodology, but a combination of whatever works.
And yeah, it seems like that there are too many labels around the different ways that people choose to learn, whether it's homeschooling or unschooling or hack schooling or deschooling, to your point.
Well, and now add home educating to that, because home educators are, I think home educators are those people who are home maybe temporarily, and then some more permanent. People like labels. They do. I have a degree in biology. I know we love to label things, but the reality is that, and you don't need to, the title of what type of homeschooling you do doesn't need to define the homeschooler you are. And that's the problem. But the other problem is people are trying to find their group. And so those labels can help you find your group, your online group community. And that's where those labels become important. Because if you're an unschool, you probably don't want to find yourself in a co-op that focuses on the classical method, unless that's what your children want to use. And if you're a homeschooler who is a religious homeschooler, homeschoolers probably isn't the best fit for you if you are using resources that aren't secular.
I think we have our primal instincts to blame of just being tribal in our DNA, and finding those kind of names and labels for specific groups. But yeah, I think we need to stop it and get on
Mhm.
with, just educating the best way that fits with our family.
Oh yeah, we deal with this all the time. We have after schoolers in our group, and some people are like, they're not real homeschoolers. So this is I'll just tell everybody, I'll put it out there. You define yourself however you want. If you think you're a homeschooler, I mean, it's that simple. You get to define. I always, when people start getting into the labels, I'm like, you know what? I'll start defining how you parent and you homeschool when I get it figured out at my home with my child, which I can tell you they're at 20, and the rest are older than him. It's not yet. We're still, it's
Still
always a
figuring
work
it
in
out, huh?
progress.
Yeah,
We're still
exactly.
figuring it out. That's life.
But I want to talk to you about what you do and your passion around handcrafted education and handcrafted project-based education, because this is like a really fascinating subject, which you are very much at the cutting edge of. So could you give us a little bit of information around that, what it means to you?
So project-based learning at its most basic. So I like to define terms so that we're all on the same page. The other thing I do is I like to pick fairly broad terms that can be specifically applied. So project-based learning at its very most basic is the application of academic and vocational skills and knowledge within a project. And so it can be, there's various, project-based learning is an umbrella, and within that umbrella you will see people doing problem-based education. Problem-based education is solution driven. Usually it depends on the age of the students, but usually the solution is known. So it's more close-ended. And then there's problem-based education. Problem-based education, did I just say problem-based education? Project-based education, I'm sorry. And that is, again, has a more closed-ended, you know exactly how you're going to get there. Project-based learning tends to be more open-ended, but you really will see people include it in there. And like, I think it's clear to people, whatever works for you works, I think, is what you should use. Don't let anybody convince you that you're doing anything wrong if it's working for you and your family, ever.
Yeah, for
Because we don't
sure.
have to live with our kids. Um, and so, but project-based learning is, so you take in the various strands and disciplines that you want to incorporate, and it is holistic, and it can bring real joy and passion to your learning environment. And so project-based learning has this real focus on learning, and it has a focus on making the information that you have learned previously meaningful, because as you begin to apply it within the context of something that matters, because often in school, think about all the school essays that you had to write, think about the math problems, even those at the end of a book, think about a lot of the science that you did. Those were chosen, not necessarily, I mean, they're trying to teach you specific principle, but it's not brought into the context of the world at large, a more global learning environment. And that's what project-based learning and actually project-based education and problem-based learning are all trying to get at the heart of that. How to weave in the subjects in a way that makes the learning feel more holistic and the learner themselves feel more engaged. Now, why project-based learning is what I really advocate is because it's open-ended. If what you want to do is incorporate writing into a project that has science and math and some history, you can get away from formal, if you want the 5-paragraph essay to be taught, you front load with what is a 5-paragraph essay, and then you give students a lot of leeway as to how they apply that within the project. Now, Michelle, the interview I did with Michelle, she really feels it's important in that environment that you, I'm bringing this up because that's actually a really great point, but if what you want students to do is express themselves in with words, does it have to be writing? Could it be an interview like we're having right now? Could it be that you put together a podcast where, you know, you're talking to people and educating them? Could it be that you write a play? So, I mean, just think if somebody got into learning about climate change and they decided to write a play, think of how many about it. Think of how many things would have to be brought into that that are really big and meaningful and actually have a lot of real world applications. And you're actually more likely to have people pay attention to your message outside of just your smaller microcosm and community. And sometimes for homeschoolers, their community is just their family when it comes to learning. And nowadays, with everything that's online, and I don't think we're ever going to go back to much less online. I think people will at some point go back to the classroom, but I think the online component, even in the classroom, is going to be there, is going to be more present. So you can really, I think, being able to articulate yourself outside of just your own small community is a learning skill that project-based learning really promotes just sort of naturally, and I think that's actually important.
Yeah,
One
for
of the
sure.
one of the um, recommendations and for project-based learning is that students do a presentation, and they decide what that presentation, generally they decide what that presentation is going to look like, and they come to that decision within the context of conducting the project. Now I hear from people that their students need more guidance, and again, we're back toward, if your student needs more guidance and your student needs you to decide what the project's going to be, then that's just you honoring, that's you handcrafting that situation for your student.
And like the presentation side of things is very interesting because it's only just dawned on me that like the traditional style of studying something for X amount of years, whatever it is, and then the traditional style of sit down and have an exam at the end of it, or the traditional style of writing a 1,500 word essay or something, the only person that's ever going to see that essay is the person that marks it. Your mum and dad never read it. Like your brothers and sisters never read it. Your friends never read it. No one cares. And so where's the incentive in the first place in a traditional system to actually, that's why it's so hard for us to write essays, I think, when you just, but with this project-based learning style and with presentation at the end of it or writing a play or something, that's completely different.
So I'm going to give you an example and of so in 2014, which I know a lot of viewers are not in the US, that's midterm elections, young people didn't come out to vote. So I turned to my husband, I said, well, that's not happening in our house. And 2016 election, my son was then in 10th grade, again in the US, that makes him 15. And so at the start, 16 at the end. And so he did this huge project-based learning where he had to choose a platform issue and then a candidate that represented that issue who's running for president. My husband let me have total leeway, but he was very insistent on that part. And then he then would work for that candidate. What was that going to look like? Well, that's actually really easy to make an open-ended project because the candidate you choose has a lot to do with how that project's going to look. Are you picking a more traditional candidate? Are you picking a more grassroots candidate? I mean, like, where did that, and so I'm not gonna get up to politics right now, but so he chose this project. Part of I had always let him just naturally follow his inclination with writing, and he did a very rigorous writing, but it wasn't what you would consider standard because I'm like, I'm a scientist. I said, you know, there's some writing is very formulaic, and frankly, the 5-paragraph essay is one of them. Michelle and I think everybody needs to learn it. She does not agree with me, and she's a writing teacher, so but you know, however you fall on that, that's up to you. But I said he'll learn that in 10th grade. He learned it, and then I said, so you've got to do a lot of writing. I made him develop a website. He had a Facebook group for this candidate. It was this really, really cool. It was, you know, 2016 election, so he learned a lot about climate change and fracking. And he then had this writing, and he was writing pieces for a blog. They got picked up by, I don't remember the exact name of the magazine, but it's a Young Political Voices or something like that. So a couple of his articles were printed in there that they read his blog pieces. And so here's this 15-year-old kid. Then he started making mini YouTube videos, and he designed this website. He had it all up on there. I want you to think about that. And this is, so if you think I am pushing this kid, no, he would get up in the morning and tell me that he had never felt more connected with his learning. And so here I've got this kid. He's written 5 articles, then he makes 5 videos, and it's January, and he decides that what he wants to do is more volunteering. And I said, so we were volunteering during the primaries and leading up to the election. And there's a group in California where I live called America's Youth that at that time, interestingly, Tom Steyer was funded it. He was one of the nominees for he lost in the primaries, but he has this initiative where you get young people to vote. And remember, that's sort of my thing. And so my son spent, he had done so much academic work that then when he said, I want to volunteer, signing people up to vote. And that's what he spent 3 months doing. He'd get up in the morning, he just could drive down. He was kind of a techie guy, so he was doing their database, their computer database something. And the presidential candidate that he had chosen to volunteer for, he ended up being one of their data entry people. It was like amazing. And so you don't have to pick something that I hear from people, okay, so you killed it with that one, but what about those of us with younger kids, multi-age kids who that wouldn't really fit our situation? That's the thing about project-based learning. If you're in a different country than I am, if you decided you were going to do a project around getting young people to vote, which you live in a country more young people vote in, so you might not choose that. Even if we started with the same premise, your project would look completely different, even if you lived in California where I do. And so it's so open-ended, and so you can, it leads to such a high level of engagement with a learner. It's just amazing. I had been doing it for a long time, and it was at that point where I really began to become a really passionate advocate. Now, again, I want to go back to what we were talking about at the very beginning. So am I now saying, hey, there's a methodology everybody needs to use? Project-based learning isn't a methodology like unschooling and classical education. So if you listen to what I was saying, I told my son some of the things he had to do, which isn't unschooling at all. But my son had a lot of opportunity to tweak and work within what I told him. You need to show me that you can write. I need to see that you're able to process information that's meaningful and share it with people, you know, both through, I said writing, and it ended up being writing and video, which it was amazing. You know, he'd write the script about fracking, and then he would put together this little mini video with him talking over it. And it was, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
he's, yeah,
Once
it was
you
pretty
once you sit
amazing.
on once you set them free and spark that creative kind of passion, it's amazing the rabbit holes that they fall into and where they get led and where the mentors are
Hmm.
hiding along the journey to go and learn from as well.
That actually is a really good point. So I wrote Project-Based Learning with a co-author, Samantha Madelone Cook, and we talk a lot about mentoring. And that is do not be afraid to reach out to people to mentor you. It's interesting. So I write science courses in addition to project-based learning, and I have parents sometimes reach out to me and say, my child has a question for you, and they're very apologetic, which I always find funny. So parents reach out to me and they don't apologize when they have a question, but a lot of them think that they apologize. Trust me, it's your kids I want to hear from. No, parents too, but I love it. I love having a 9-year-old reach out to me who wants to ask some question about chemistry or give me a piece of advice about a lab that I might want in my next book. I absolutely, it makes it, I could be writing smut romances, so I'm not in it. I'm not in writing for the money. I'm in it for the learning, and just as you can tell, because I get turned on by this stuff.
So, and if could you tell the listeners or the viewers, excuse me, more about like the kind of project learning, handcrafted project learning materials that you write, because you're kind of known as the scientist among the homeschooling crowd, if I have that correct.
Yes, you are. I'm a fairly well-known scientist in the homeschool community. I've been writing science courses for several years now, about 15 years. Okay, I have to use my son's age. So repeat the question again. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, exactly. What does that look like? What does that look like for like the end user when they get one of these
Okay.
project-based, handcrafted project-based learning experiences?
So it was really interesting to write a book. The project-based learning. We wrote a book called Project-Based Learning: Creating a Modern Education of Curiosity, Innovation, and Impact. And we talk about the why, and then we talk about how to do it, because I really feel that a lot of these books that recommend that you a specific learning environment or methodology, very few of them then say how to do it. So, okay, you sold me on the why, but how do I do it? And that is really problematic for a lot of parents, especially when they get sold on the method. So we spent most of the time on the how. Within writing the how, my co-author Sam Cook and I decided that it was really important that we give some examples. And so we don't just weave in examples like I just gave of my son and this project around politics, but we laid out some specific projects. But that is a little complicated, because how do you design a project if it's supposed to be open-ended? And so we don't give as much. The problem really is that you only can flesh it out so much, because what you're really doing is you're taking someone. Let's think of it, a race is a bad analogy, but let's think of it as I'm taking you to the starting line of a race. I've got you here. There's some specific parameters you have to follow, but you can complete this any way you want, including making it not a competition at all. You then open it up for the learner. And so Sam and I recommend that you that's why I started by defining it as the application of vocational and academic knowledge and skills. So one of the things that Sam and I recommend is that you start by deciding what you want applied. Okay. And so to the political part, I wanted my son to understand how politics works in the US. I wanted my son, and we were really complete with that. We even we looked at how the the application of to Indigenous people, because that's in the United States, that's a really fascinating and sad way that federal and state laws are applied. So anyway, I won't get off on that. So there was that, there was website design, there was writing, there was some science, because that was climate change was a really big issue. It still is, but in the 2016 election cycle, it was very big. And so I decided that those were going to be in, and then I opened it up for my son to figure out how he was going to apply it. And so it's interesting to write for people, give guidance. So we funded the book on Kickstarter, that book came out last year. And one of our stretch goals was a Harry Potter book study. Harry Potter themed book study. You have to be, actually, it's an unofficial Harry Potter themed book study. You have to really cover your bases when you are writing something that Warner Brothers and Universal own some of. That is, so we've done our best, including it added about a week just to go through and weave through and make sure that we didn't use any trademark names, which we did one out yesterday. That should be out this next week. So so that started as a similar thing where we wanted to be open-ended, but it's a book study. And so you've got to keep riffing off of the book. So we have loads and loads. Sam Cook, she has spent a lot of time in the making community. And so there's all these projects. I wrote science projects. We've got history. We've got research. And so after we were done with all the projects, we had to come back and reweave the project-based learning strand, because otherwise you just have a collection of projects right around, and they're fun projects. Like, it's really cool to do some science magic and to learn some card tricks. Are those magic? So our driving question, which most projects have a driving question, is what is magic? So Sam and I have a very grown-up answer.
Wow.
Friends
That
and
sounds
family.
that sounds amazing. I'm sure that one's going to do really well.
It's already done pretty well in the pre-sales. We hope so. We hope so.
Yeah, good topic, because like so many kids love those books, and it's a global reach.
Well, so many kids love the books. It also lends itself to a projects. I mean, it's so cool too, because so in it, the premise is is that kids go to Hogwarts. They basically, and so you sort of create this whole first year of Hogwarts, and you do these various potions. Like I've actually written some original science labs for it, and then Sam has put her making skills. We had to go back through and make a basic and advanced version. Okay, so probably the most artistic, crafty person paired with me, who is completely craft impaired. And I was looking at them like, you're intimidating me. We need a basic version for parents like me.
Yeah, exactly. That sounds very, very cool. So I wanted to ask you one last question about homeschooling, which is very topical right now, and the fact that almost everybody was pushed into a corner to homeschool for a certain amount of time, whether it was anywhere between 2 to 8 weeks, depending on which country you found yourself in, for the COVID pandemic. And how you see coming out of this, the other side, how you see that picking up. Does that push more people towards perhaps thinking about homeschooling, or is that going to have had the opposite effect? I'd just love to get your kind of views around it, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
So my group, See Homeschoolers, we run our forum We have a website, but we run our forum on Facebook. Um, we are secular academic, which means that we don't necessarily say you should be using textbooks. Actually, uh, I think there's a lot of really good curriculum for home educators, and most of them aren't written for public school settings. It's really hard to make those work. As many parents probably know right now, we're growing by over 1,000 people a week.
Hmm.
It's it is, what does that mean? That means that people are really paying a lot of attention. Now, this, if anybody's watching the news in the States, this is, we are having riots all across the United States. I bring this up because it really just tells you how much unrest there is in our country. I really expect to see, right now we have 25% unemployment in the US. So what does that mean? That means there are parents now home. And at first it's really scary, but those jobs aren't coming back tomorrow. And I bring that up because most homeschooling situations have one parent who sometimes it's not a matter of giving up an income, but sometimes parents give up an income to stay home. Well, if you're unemployed, you're home anyway. There's going to be a lot more people working from home. I think Facebook is, most of their staff is permanently going to be working at home. That makes it easier to and in this case, I'm going to refer to it as home educating, because for some people, they're just going to keep using, and not just, I don't mean to sound like I'm denigrating it at all. Hey, whatever works for you, but they're going to be using resources that come from their school district. But with the violence and the unrest, that really leads parents to pull their kids closer. And it just feels very uncertain. The other thing that we're starting to see in the States is you're starting to see more people of color, and you're seeing more people, for example, from the LGBTQ community. We're seeing more so immigrants in the United States, not as much Hispanic at this point, but some Muslim immigrants, and those people are choosing to home educate. Home education has really gone mainstream. I can tell you from now, we live in the western part of California, obviously the western part of the US, but the western part of the US tends to be more blue, more Democrat than Republican. That's important because Democrats don't tend to, overall, they are less likely to support homeschooling. And so you'd think the public colleges and universities in the western part of the United States would be harder for a homeschooled kid to get in. Not if you use secular academic resources. It is not. My son applied to get into 11 colleges, and all but one of them offered scholarships. Not full ride scholarships by any means. Turns out he nailed the essay, guys. Didn't do bad on the ACT either, but he nailed the essay. So yay for letting kids find their own muse with writing.
Oh yeah, for sure. And
Yeah. But not just, the reason I brought C into it is because I think we can use that group. So in the States, people who have been, there's some groups for parents whose kids came home. Many of them have recommended our group. Oops, sorry, that probably is going to be loud. Have recommended our group. And the reason I bring that up is just that, just because of our position on academic materials, it just is easy because, if you use the materials we recommend, we advocate you use, you can just turn around tomorrow and go back to traditional school. And if, so but yeah, I think it's here to stay. As far as handcrafting, this is what I would have to say to anybody who is nervous about handcrafting. First of all, I want to start with the traditional school situation and tell you that they don't get it right 100% of the time either. Let's think of this like a baseball game. Sometimes they hit a home run and sometimes they strike out. Most of the time they get to one of the bases as far as they're educating of a child. All the children that are in a traditional school situation, at least in the States, are using the same textbook, whether it works for those kids, and the teacher is really focusing on best teaching practices. She has to. She's not doing anything wrong. When you bring your children home, you have the opportunity to focus on best learning practices for them. That can be challenging because you will have kids of multiple ages, and even if you have kids of the same age, twins, they'll have multiple abilities in some areas. We see that all the time. You can address those. In fact, it is really common in the homeschool environment to see people bring kids home who have some sort of learning challenge, and they begin to thrive because they're having a tailored, a handcrafted education that really focuses on both their strengths and their challenges, and engages the student in a way that honors who they are as a unique individual, as opposed to they're behind, or because at the end of the day, there is absolutely no timeline for learning. And that is the other thing. Don't bring that, have a paradigm shift with that. If you went through the traditional education system, there was a timeline for when you learned things. When your kids come home, there is absolutely no timeline for learning. You can have kids like my son who's writing, they just took off and could take off. And if I unschooled in any area, it was largely writing because he just loved writing. Math, didn't love math. I was a much more chose a much more traditional path for his home learning. And I bring that up because that's why I don't like to get tied to any one methodology. Let you and your kids find something that fits their own unique needs. It does mean that you probably want to get guidance about in large groups where you will find people who have dealt with the same situation as you, and find your community. If I come from, I founded a specific community. Hey, if you're listening to this and thinking that community wouldn't be right for me, find one, because these big forums, they're like a teacher's lounge. That's what they really are. You know, I think we have over 42,000 members. It's the biggest teacher's lounge you'll ever be in, but that's what it is, and that's how it functions at most effectively. And then help your children become lifelong learners. When you engage them in a way, it is powerful. They begin to recognize that you respect their own unique intellect and who they are, at the same time that you value learning.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's yeah, for anybody listening that is been pushed into the homeschooling and is feeling the pinch of it, it's a problem that goes along with the social construct around us, that we believe, like, by sending them to school is the best thing, and therefore they'll be fine and everything will play out. But as Blair was just explaining, everybody learns at different speeds, at different times, at different ways, and it's just but it's hard. It's so tough to let go. So tough to let go.
Oh my gosh, it's so tough to let go. And within letting go, you still think, did I do it right? Like I said, sometimes you're going to hit a home run, sometimes you're going to strike out. That would be this case anywhere, as long as you kept doing your best and honoring who that student was. Today. That's the other thing. The person that you're home educating at 7 is not the same personality that you're educating at 13. And so one of the things that people who have successfully home educated for a while is, I like to call it my 2 hats, my teacher hat and my mom hat. And sometimes I actually had to look at the situation I was dealing with my son and think, I would never, when we were in the context of homeschool, of us, learning, I think I would never let him get away with that. if I were not the teacher. And so then I basically say, I'm putting my mom hat on right now, and no way, if you do not stop this, I'm going to have to discipline you, because this is not okay for you to treat a teacher that way. And so
Yeah.
it's really interesting when that would happen. But it did happen. I'm not going to pretend it was all rainbows and roses.
Oh, we've all got those battle scars. We all have them. Those days where it just doesn't click, and you question everything that that you're doing.
Hey, I forgot. I made a note, and then I didn't. There is one thing I want to say, and that is for people who are homeschooling, who are home educating multiples or kids at different learning. There are, that is one of the things with project-based learning where it's at its most powerful, I think, is in those situations, because of the open-ended nature of a project, you can really tailor it to sort of have multi-strands for each student.
Yeah.
Is it a sunny day where you are?
Oh, it was, but I just lost all of the light there. That's better. Yeah, I think you can see me again.
I
Yeah, no,
can see you.
we're
It
just
was
getting
kind
ready.
of dark.
Um,
Yes, well, it's hours difference.
yes. Well, that was yeah, there's a subject I think really important actually to discuss. I'm glad we somehow landed on that, because it doesn't get talked about enough, I don't think. I think many people, when they're beating the homeschool drum, get a bit carried away about, oh, it's so much better than the system. It's all, it's this, it's that. But we got to be, honest, and it's difficult. And I think, yeah, I remember Jen Miller from last year. She's like, if you want an easy life, put them on the big yellow bus.
Hmm.
But right.
I think one of the things we need to pay attention to in this, like that, I'm going to not give a nod to the title, which, by the way, Sam Cooke came up with, Creating a Modern Education of Curiosity, Innovation, and Impact. I think things are changing really quickly right now. I think we're going to shrink a bit and then expand. I see some of the social, I think as societies, that there is a substantial push toward more egalitarian systems. Um, and so that's really interesting to look at. I think that, oh, do you see my pug finally woke up? She's like, ooh. If you heard snoring, it wasn't me. I think that we as home educators are really well suited to address that much more effectively than schools. But home education is not easy. It is tough. It redefines your role. However you imagine being a mom or a dad or whatever, for someone who's non-binary, whatever you imagined, once you add educating your children into that mix, it's considerably different, and that can be challenging. And because you're incorporating learning into your children's learning into it, you're doing it on the fly. And so some people handle that much better than others. I would plan and then wad them all up and throw them in the trash 2 weeks later sometimes. It was so so it could be so frustrating, but also so joy filled. It gave us a lot of opportunities. We traveled a lot. We did a lot of service projects. My son was on a ski team in a little ski town that we lived in, and so he was able to. It was a really nice childhood, but we didn't home educate for the childhood reasons. As you know, my feeling is you're an adult longer than you're a child, and your education, I don't look at education as just, I look at learning as one of the most important endeavors that humans can do. It connects us to each other and to the world. And it connects us, not the big us, me, you, in a way that brings value and meaning to our lives. Education is what, when you learn, you get an education. education sets you up for the adult part of your life. And I think that is very important that we remember that, so that our children can have the skills, both academic and vocational and just functional, to be able to go out in the world and be whoever they decide they want to be.
Yeah, and that's the exciting part of it. And all the hard work does pay off. It's happened time and time again. And the amount of people that we've interviewed on these summits over the years that have the evidence, in their own kids. So I'm going to ask one last question.
Mm-hmm.
If you could implant your knowledge of homeschooling and the difference it can make for families and individuals and kids. Who would you choose to implant that knowledge in so that they could go and then share that message with their following far wider than any one of us could ever imagine reaching?
So a specific person
Mm.
or a specific class of people?
Specific person.
I ah, that is a really hard one, because there are really good people out there. Um, the problem is, I wow, I had no idea that you were going to ask this question. Um, I think so. You've got one of them on. I couldn't even believe it when I started sending your URL to everybody. I'm like, I'm on the same page as Ken Robinson. So you've got people who are already doing that. I think that I'm going to be completely partisan, everybody. It would be the next person in charge of the Department of Education in the United States. And that, not the person we have now. I would, and the reason, I just think that it is really important that the Department of Education in the country that has the largest population of homeschoolers, I think it's important. We have come into our own, guys, and I think it's important that we're here to stay. And so it's important that the Department of Education in the country where most homeschoolers reside recognizes that, because there's several conferences happening. A group of someone that had been abused while not because of being home educated, but while being home educated, put together a conference at Harvard looking at restrictions that should be put on homeschoolers. Then another group in response to that was largely promoted. Most of I think every single one of their speakers was ranged from unschooler to radical unschooling advocate. I think it's important that those of us in the middle start to get some representation from the top, because we did choose to pull our children out of school. Yes, we are still paying property taxes, many of us. Some of us aren't. It depends on your situation. But if you're paying rent to somebody who's using some of that to pay property taxes, and we are educating our children in a way that they can go out and get meaningful things that mean something to them, a college degree, a job without a college, whatever. I mean, like, we're doing a really good job. And so it's really, it's a mistake that they're not paying attention, because it means there's no legislation happening and please don't send me emails. I'm not advocating for or against it. I've stayed I think that there needs to be a meaningful conversation around it. There's no meaningful conversations. You have people on either side. Nothing in the middle is getting discussed. So you're never going to come up with anything. In the States, by the way, each state legislates homeschooling. And that's a mistake. There's no consistency. And so that is who I would really like to impart my knowledge. I would really like them to be able to acknowledge that home educating isn't a fringe movement. Most of us are not doing a bad job. In fact, we're doing a great job. It doesn't mean that, and most of us aren't some of us are, but many of us aren't anti-school. We just chose not to use it for our kids. Yeah.
And yeah, that is the critical word, right? It's choice. Like, I want to make that point clear. This isn't a rage against the machine just for the sake of it. This is just exercising choice and realizing that there is a choice, which many people don't.
Realizing there is a choice and feeling like, hey, you guys, you got this. You've got it. I just did a Facebook Live talking about relax about the things you can't control. And that is one of the things. You've got this. And relax about what you can't control. And within this, so just recognize you've got this.
That is a perfect place to leave it, Blair. You got this.
You got this.
Thank you so much for your time and your insights, and as well for volunteering and being so gracious to host a few interviews as well. I really look forward to checking those out. Thank you so much.
I think that might be my new jam. I liked interviewing.
Well, there you go. Always learning. Huh?
That's right.
Thanks, Blair.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.